He was found deceased at his house, and police are still wondering, was this murder or did he do it to himself? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ted Loseff. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you're new to the channel, I tell 3 true crime stories every week here on YouTube on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I also pepper in some YouTube shorts, like short true crime little tales as well. I also do that over on TikTok, where I'm probably more known. I have about 3 million-ish followers over there. If you want to follow that, the link is in the link tree in the description of this video below. It also pops up here at some point in the beginning, and also at the end of the video if you want to follow that page. Also in the link tree, you'll see my merch store. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. We ship all over this wonderful little planet of ours called Biplop. That's not right. Nope. And lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just email me. My email is listed below, and just email me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. It currently has 5,700 names on that list, and so I pick my cases at random. I will get to your case eventually. I just cannot tell you when. I do that to be fair as possible. You can see the list, by the way, in the link tree below. It's a public list. You can't add to it yourself, but you can look at it. It's alphabetical, so feel free to check the name first if you want to. But let's get into today's case. This will be a bit of a shorter one because there really isn't a super ton of information. Theodore Allen Loseff, who would go by Ted to everyone. He was born on July 8th, 1932 in Chicago, Illinois. I do know that he had at least one sibling, and at the time of this case, he is 40 years old, and he is a successful orthopedic surgeon. Orthopedic. It's a hard word to say. And he was living in the Hancock Park area, which was in Los Angeles, California. 2 years before this case happened, he married a woman named Wilda, and it sounds like pretty much almost from the get-go that their marriage just was not going great. They were having issues, it seems like. It doesn't sound like, to me, it doesn't sound like Ted was really confident this marriage was going to last. He had Wilda, they signed a prenuptial that basically, in the event of a divorce, she would get absolutely nothing. None of his property, nothing. It was the evening of February 23rd, 1974. Wilda calls police, and she is claiming that Ted is in the house, he's going crazy, and he's got a gun. Now, she isn't in the house anymore. She has left the house because she was scared of him. So police arrive, and they're armed, and they're kind of cautiously approaching the house. On the door, he doesn't respond. They do enter it. They have permission from the wife to do so. They have their guns drawn just in case. They're calling out his name. They're searching every square inch of that house inside. He is nowhere to be found. So they begin to search the perimeter of the home, and that's what their garage is basically the separate building behind or next to the house. And they get there and they hear the sound of a car running inside the garage. And so they go to the side door and they bust the door down. And that's when they find Ted. He is slumped over in his car. The images I'm showing are recreations from Unsolved Mysteries because there really is not a lot of images, actual images to be found of this one. The garage is full of exhaust, and there is a hose running from his exhaust pipe into the front seat, the driver's seat of the vehicle where Ted was sitting, and he was slumped over. Immediately, police are like, this was a suicide. Ted killed himself. And the coroner pretty much agreed, yep, this was a suicide, case closed. That's the end of the case. In the master bedroom, they discovered what they claimed was a suicide note written on this piece of cardboard. The note said, "All I ever asked for was one moment of compassion and understanding." Ted's mother, Zell, immediately did not buy this story of suicide. And of course, most direct family members and siblings, they don't want to believe that's what happened, and so they do start to believe it was something else. But there was just something about this one where Zell, his mom, may have been onto something. Zell would meet with Wilda sometime after Ted's death. They met at a restaurant, and Wilda, she took this gold watch out of her purse and she threw it at Ted's mom and said, "Here, that's what you're here for, isn't it?" And because it was an heirloom that Ted's mom had passed down to Ted, she didn't actually ask for it back, but that's what Wilda did. She brought it and she threw it at her at this restaurant and said, "Here you go, and here, take it." And then she told his mom, "Honestly, I'm glad he's dead." And that's when Zell was like, I know he wasn't. I know he didn't do this to himself. I think she had something to do with this. She went to the house, and when she went to the garage where the car was parked, Zell, his mom, she noticed that it was relatively empty. Not empty completely, but there was a room for a car to be in there because that's where Ted was found. She thought that was extremely odd because the last time she was at the house, which honestly was only a few days prior to this happening, that garage was full of boxes and junk and there was no room to park a car in it. And she also recalled that Ted pretty much never parked his car in the garage. One of the reasons why is because the house that Ted lived in had this big iron gate, but the gate was broken. It was jammed. It was very difficult to open manually. And so Ted just began parking directly in front of the house to avoid ever driving onto the property. So Zell was telling police, "I think he was killed. This was not a suicide." And at first police were like, "Ma'am, we understand you're grieving. This has got all the clear indications that he did this to himself." But Zell was like, "No, I don't think it. I don't think that." So she would reach out to Ted's old housekeeper. Her name was Mary. And she told them about the events that happened the afternoon that Ted was later found dead. On that afternoon, Mary arrived at the house and she was a bit late to work that day. But she was talking to Ted, and Ted seemed very kind of out of sorts. He seemed upset. He told Mary, "Hey, there's going to be a big change happening. It looks like Wilda and I are probably getting a divorce." And he said it very directly to her. An hour or so later, Wilda's home, and Mary hears Wilda and Ted arguing and screaming upstairs. And then she kind of goes out to say, "Hey, you guys, what's going on? What are you guys fighting over?" And then that's when Wilda and Ted come rushing down the stairs. Wilda's in hysterics, "He has a gun. He's going to shoot us." But Mary never sees a gun. There's no gun in Ted's hand. But Wilda keeps claiming that Ted has a gun. Ted was like, "I don't have a gun. I don't know what she's saying." And he just gave Mary her money for the day because I guess he paid her daily. And he said, "Just, it's okay. You can just go home for the day." And as Mary is leaving, Wilda runs out into the middle of the street in front of her car. And she's in hysterics, "Please, he's got a gun." Again, Mary never saw a gun. And Wilda was like, "Can I just get in your car and go home with you just so I can be safe?" And Mary's like, "Okay, sure." So by about 3 p.m., Mary and Wilda are back at Mary's house. And she just, the stuff that Wilda is saying, it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't make any sense. Mary didn't know Ted to be this violent guy. She never once saw a gun in the house in all the years she worked there. She just thought this was off. And she's like, "You know what? Wilda, just sit there. I'm going to call Ted. I'm going to talk to him." So she tries to call the Loseff home, but it's busy. She calls again. It's busy. Again, it's busy. She calls 20 times between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. Every time the line is busy. And then a few minutes after 8 p.m., she then tries one more time to call the Loseff home, and then suddenly it's ringing. It rings, it rings, it rings. Nobody answers. And so at that point, Mary's like, "Something is very wrong here, and I'm calling police again." Because she had tried calling police earlier with regards to this whole thing about a gun, but because Mary hadn't seen the gun, police wouldn't go to the house. But this time when she calls after, 8 p.m. and says something is wrong, police are like, "Okay, we'll go check it out." And that's when they find Ted dead in the garage. When Mary found out about this supposed suicide note written on this piece of cardboard, she said, "Something about that note looks really familiar." And she remembers that about 2 years prior, shortly after Ted and Wilda got married and moved in to this house, shortly after that, Mary noticed, or she remembered seeing that exact same note 2 years prior. But it had been put away somewhere, years ago. And now suddenly that note comes back up when Ted is found dead in the garage. And she's like, I'm pretty sure that note was not written, now. I think that was written years ago. Mary also saw, because she went back to the house when they found the body, and she was outside, Mary now with her husband, because Mary had a husband too. She saw Ted being carried out, and he was wearing different clothes than he was wearing when she had last seen him at the house just hours before. Just completely different clothing. He could have changed, of course, but she thought that was strange. Mary continued to work at the house because Wilda was living there after Ted's death, and Mary said that she never found the clothing that she remembers seeing Ted in the day he died. She never found those clothes. And she also noticed, like a day or so after the death, that there was this big stain on the comforter of their bed. And she looked at it and she's like, that's a weird looking stain. And she kind of goes, I think that's a vomit stain. And she shows Wilda, like, hey, I think someone threw up on your comforter. And then Wilda's like, oh, that's that was the dog who did that. Okay. But then Mary remembers, but the dogs haven't been here. They were in a kennel at the time. I don't know why, but they were in a kennel. In 1978, Ted's body, after a very lengthy legal battle, was exhumed. And Zell, his mom, was able to get a new autopsy performed on him. And that's when the coroner found some things that he would end up changing the death from suicide to undetermined. They were able to tell in the autopsy that Ted, just shortly before his death, suffered an extremely violent vomiting spell. He had been throwing up a lot. I guess they can tell through the examination of the esophagus and the stomach and all that. But the thing is when his body was found, there was no vomit anywhere in the car or on him, on his clothing or anything. There was no vomit on his face, anywhere. And the coroner said this would have probably happened literally before he died, because it was a fresh, there were fresh indications, that he was going through a vomiting spell. They also found what appeared to be bruises on Ted's body, indicating that just before he was killed, he had been either maybe slightly beaten or pinned down and held very tightly, on his arms and whatnot. He was pinned down somewhere and he had bruises on his body to indicate that. So the coroner rules it from a suicide to then an undetermined. And then I guess they do another autopsy just to have it confirmed. At this point, the death is now ruled a homicide. Zell believes that on the day of the murder, which we're now saying is a murder, Ted and Wilda got into the argument, which was observed by Mary, and then Wilda comes running out of the house and gets in Mary's car. Zell believes that likely one or two men, probably at least two men, entered the home and accosted Ted, maybe fought with him a little bit, possibly hit him a couple of times, and pinned him to his bed. She thinks they force-fed him some kind of poison or medicine, like an overdose of some kind, and which caused him to get sick within minutes and caused him to throw up numerous times. And because of that, she thinks he threw up on his clothes, and that's why the supposed potential killers took his clothing off and put new clothes on, and then either burned or somehow disposed of the clothes he was wearing. They then brought his body to his vehicle, but then they noticed the garage was full of stuff, and so they took all the boxes out, because the boxes that were in the garage, that Zell said were in the garage, were never found. They weren't anywhere. And then they forced the gate open because it was hard to open. They then drove Ted's car into the garage and set it up with the pipe to make it look like he did this to himself. His cause of death, I don't know his actual cause of death. I don't know if they ever actually announced that. That's the one thing that seems to be a bit unknown, is what actually caused him to die. because the coroner at the time did not do, when they first found him, they did not do a very thorough examination because it was just ruled a suicide. And they didn't really do much. And so by the time he was buried and then exhumed, whatever, if there may have been something in his body, it may have been gone at that point if they were doing like a toxicology report or something. I'm not 100% sure. In March of 1982, the LAPD would actually order an inquest into this death again. They did determine that that note that they found on cardboard was in fact written by Ted, but they also determined through numerous witnesses that that note was in fact written 2 years prior to Ted's death. That was not a freshly written note. The inquest, now official, has changed this from a suicide, and officially, Ted Loseff's death has been ruled, not just by the coroner, but by the authorities, this was a murder. This was a homicide. And they announced that a suspect in this case was Wilda Loseff, his wife. But on May 1st, 1983, they would realize that they would never be able to pursue justice, at least against Wilda. Because on May 1st, 1983, Wilda Loseff overdosed on drugs and alcohol, and she died. If Zell's theory is correct that Wilda hired people to kill him, which more than likely is the case, because I just don't think Wilda would have been able to move his body into the car and then all that stuff with the gate and the garage and all that and moving boxes. This would have required at least another person helping her directly, or two people that she hired to do. But they found no evidence that would indicate that she did that. She may have disposed of that evidence. There's no way of knowing now. They can't interview her. They can't question her. She's dead. There is a possibility that those two people, if it is two people, maybe more, are still out there, and perhaps they have told people what they've done, and maybe someone somewhere out there has heard these stories. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. So if you have any information about the homicide of Ted Loseff, please contact the Los Angeles Police Department with any information you have. You can report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. Sadly, in 2010, Ted's mother, Zell, who fought so hard to get justice for her son, she passed away at the age of 101. She stuck around as long as she possibly could to get justice for her son, but she did not get it. And so you can't let her dedication to her son, her love for her son, her intuition that he was killed, can't let all that go to waste. She spent the rest of her life trying to find out who did this and why. And so if you know something, you've got to come forward, not just for Ted, but do it for Zell too. Because Zell, and especially Ted Loseff, they should both get the justice they rightfully deserve. But that is it for this case. True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe. Give this video a like so more people can see it with their peepers. What was that? I don't know. Check out the merch store in the link tree below. Follow me over on TikTok. Did I say that? I don't know. Maybe. Let's say it again. Okay. Recommend a case to my email. Just the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to the list. It's a big list. I'll get to the case when I get to it. Can't tell you when. Okay? Okay? Capiche? You got it, okay? Stop it, Mike. You got it. Why do I keep... What is this voice I'm even trying to do? That's... Hi. Ice mug. 4-pack on Amazon. I almost choked on Dew. I almost choked on Mountain Dew. Oh, the Dew almost killed me. I do the dude and do the dude. I don't do the dudes. Well, I'm gay, but you know, I do the do. I almost became a case on my own case, on my own page. This is the death of Mike, the guy who tells crime story. What am I doing? Anyway, this is uncomfortable for me as it is for you, I'm sure. So, hey, want to hear a joke? My life. Okay. See ya. In the arms of the angel, fly.